For the past decades, he's been engaged in the solo practice of law here in Lexington. He's a 1970 graduate of Transylvania University, 1976 graduate of the University of Kentucky College of Law. He grew up in New York City. His family's roots in Puerto Rico. Josh has served in so many positions of civic leadership that I'm not going to go through all of them. Upon graduating from Transy, he was awarded an officer's commission in the United States Navy. He's retired United States Navy captain. He has served as the chair of the Lexington Hispanic Education Association, an advocacy group, the chair of our Central Music Academy. In addition, he sits on the board of the Gaines Center for the Humanities, the Pritchard Committee, the Education Commissioners, Raising Achievement, Closing the Gap Council. Recently, he was named to Transylvania's Board of Regents. He is a trustee and a choir member of our Central Christian Church. He was the first person from Central Christian that made contact with me as the chair of your search committee. And I've come to know, and I have come to have tremendous respect for Josh Santana. So we welcome him this morning.
Thank you, David. I have to say, you make me look good. That was smarter things I've done, I've been part of. So, let me initially give you some of my personal history, just for a little bit of it, just to give you some context as to what I'm going to be talking about. David had mentioned I was born in Puerto Rico. I was born in rural Puerto Rico, in what we call Las Montañas, the mountains. I'm the youngest of 6. I have 4 sisters, 4 sisters who I call superwomen, and a brother.
Use the microphone, please.
I think he is.
No, I can't hear you.
I have 4 sisters and a brother. We are spread out all over the United States, and that reflects the independence instilled in us by our parents. I have a sister in California, a sister in New York, a sister in New Jersey, a sister in Puerto Rico, my brother's in Florida, and I'm here in Kentucky. And that, as I said, was part of what we were and how we were raised to be. My dad first came to New York in 1938, and he worked in an Italian restaurant. He stayed in New York for something under a year, and then went back to Puerto Rico because my oldest sister was born. And he came back in 1949. The first time he came by ship, and he tells us the story of passing by the Statue of Liberty, and even though he was an American citizen as he touched down in Puerto Rico, in the United States, the Statue of Liberty still holds a very close and emotional significance for him. So he came in 1949, and the plan was that he would work, and he would work, and he would work, and he would work, and he would raise enough money to send up for my mother. And then she came, and then she would work, and she would work, and she would work, and they would start to bring us over. I came over in 1950. I was 2 years old at the time. We moved into Spanish Harlem, lived in some very nice neighborhoods, or at least nice sounding neighborhoods. Our first apartment was a basement apartment located between 5th Avenue and Madison Avenue on 108th Street. And while we lived there, my sister Dolly was bitten by a rat. And then we moved from there, and it's like the Jeffersons, moving on up. Well, not hardly. We moved to 110th Street, which was 110th Street and Park Avenue. We had a pretty ritzy address. It was 1505 Park Avenue. Sounds nice. Actually, it was over a mattress factory. This was an interesting business because they weren't making mattresses. What they were doing was refurbishing mattresses. And so they would send out horse-drawn carriages throughout the streets, and they would pick up old mattresses from the sidewalks. And then they would bring them to this factory, and they would strip them down and recover them, and I guess sell them. I am convinced to this day that the reason that you have that little tag on your mattress that says it is a federal offense to remove this tag was because of this factory. The apartment, it was an interesting apartment because it was upstairs, and it was 2-story, the factory was 1-story, and we lived on the 2nd floor. Needless to say, it was a bed bugs paradise in that building. My dad waged war against these bed bugs. I don't know when they outlawed DDT, but I can tell you right now that he would come into that room and we would all get out of the room and he would spray a cloud of whatever it was that he was spraying in order to get rid of the bed bugs. But that particular apartment, I think, was very influential in my development. Like I said, it was on the 2nd floor, the factory was 1 floor, and so the factory roof ran way out, and then an L went in the other direction. And so from our 2nd-story windows, we could climb out to that roof as kids. And that became essentially our backyard. The front of our building was I'm trying to think of the Metro North Harlem Viaduct. If you're in New York and you go down to 110th Street and Park Avenue, you'll see that there's an elevated train. But the wall of that elevated train is made out of the same stone that was used to build the wall around Central Park. And so it cut us off from the other side of Park Avenue, where there were a bunch of tenements. We were here. There was an empty lot next to our house. On the end of the block, there was a flop house and a bar. And so we had our own little area. We're very, very, very energetic. And there was a lot of emotion that came out of the services. La Hermosa was where my friends were. Even though we were living in the Bronx, La Hermosa was a magnet, for whatever reason, for people from Queens, from Brooklyn, of course from the area of Manhattan, and from the Bronx. And so most of my close friends, with one exception, were from La Hermosa. Our young people's group, we were all each other's best friends. We hung out together, and we were, I described this to a friend of mine at the Y, and he said, you know what you were, Josh? You were a nerd. And he's right, as I thought about it. You know, we would hang out together, and after church services, we would do things, exciting things, like we would walk from 110th Street up to 86th Street and go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And then if we were really inspired, we would walk across the park and go to the Natural History Museum. Or we would hang out at the Museum of the City of New York, or we would go to a movie together and watch the 10 Commandments, or West Side Story. I mean, this is what passed for a good time for us. One of the things that we did, that La Hermosa did, was we owned a part of that church. You know, we would come in on a Saturday, and as a group, we would prepare the sanctuary for worship. We would go up and down the aisles, we would wipe down the wood, we would vacuum, and then we would go watch a movie somewhere, or hang out, have lunch, or go to one of our homes. I had and just to give you an example of how lasting this was, my best friend growing up was a fellow named Pete Miranda, Pedro Luis Miranda. Pete and I don't know when I haven't known Pete. I remember Pete, you know, from being a child at La Hermosa Christian Church. And we lost track of each other a little bit when I was in the Navy, and Pete had dropped out of college and had gone to Nam. And my last part of my Navy active duty, my executive officer made arrangements for me to go to the JAG Corps office in Brooklyn, and to see if I was interested maybe in taking extended leave and staying in the Navy as a JAG officer. Pete's parents lived in Brooklyn. I decided, that I was going to go see his parents, because we would, as we were growing up, we would always drop in on each other's homes unannounced and looking for a meal. And so I said, why not, this is, just continuing a pattern. And so I walked over there, and on the way, Pete was sitting on a stoop. And Pete had just gotten out of Nam. And like a lot of Vietnam veterans, he had let his hair grow. It was long. He let his beard grow. It was long. And we reconnected at that point. And I talked to him about, Pete, you got to go to college. You're too smart. You got to go to college. You got to go to college. And I was getting ready to enter law school, and about a week before law school started, I got a call from Pete. And I invited him to come down and visit us, and I said, Pete, what are you up to? He says, well, I need somebody to pick me up at the airport. And I said, oh, great, you're coming down to visit. How long are you going to stay? He said, well, as best I can tell, 4 years. And I said, what? He said, I start at Transylvania. Anyway, Pete finished up transient, and he gets into law school. So I'm at law school. Pete's 2 years behind me. He gets into law school, and he marries. And I don't know how many of you know this. I have twin daughters. And Pete calls me and says, guess what? I said, okay, I'm not going to try. He says, we're pregnant. I said, okay, that's great, Pete. He says, guess what? I said, I don't know, Pete, you tell me. They're twins. And Pete's an interesting guy. He wound up actually leaving law in order to teach middle school, which is what he's doing today, and hopefully he'll retire this year. You asked me, let me make one more point about the Mozart Christian Church, and that's that group. We had about 20 kids who were, like I said, each other's best friends. From that group of 20, 100% graduated high school, and I can think of none that didn't go on to college. We produced at least 2 lawyers, Pete and me, at least 1 doctor, Jimmy Soledad, at least 1 pharmacist, scores of teachers. And I don't know what it was about La Hermosa. I think it was the critical mass of having each other. But it's something that I'll refer to as we go forward with regards to the Central Music Academy. Heroes, people, men who were influential in my life. My Sunday school teacher, Jesus Rosario. I remember Jesus Rosario very warmly. I remember especially, and it's small things that count, I remember especially the fact that every Christmas he would take us on a trip to Macy's downtown. That was a big deal because it exposed us to the Lionel train exhibit that Macy's had. And it was just an incredible adventure for us, just to be in Macy's. And it was to some extent, the kid with his nose on the window in the store looking in, because there was no way that any of us thought that we'd ever be able to afford anything in Macy's. But just being there, just watching and just seeing the toy exhibits and just dreaming about the possibility that one day we might be able to go in there and not feel like we didn't belong was important. Fernando Flores was our scoutmaster, Boy Scout and Cub Scout master. Fernando Flores, interesting guy, Army vet, took us through Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. In Boy Scouts, we had to change things because we didn't have access to camps and what have you. And so what Fernando Flores did was taught us to box. And now that's a merit badge for Boy Scouts, but back then it wasn't. But we started boxing. I had a short-lived boxing career, by the way. I thought I was pretty good. This was Muhammad Ali days, Cassius Clay at the time, And, you know, we would all bounce around and dance around, what have you, and then eventually somebody would catch us with a left hook. But what I discovered about boxing is that it is far, far much more fun to hit than to be hit. And we were trying to put together a team within the Spanish gloves for the Golden Gloves. And so we had organizational fights, and this is the Spanish gloves. And anyway, they paired me up with some Irish kid, Eddie. I don't remember Eddie's last name, but it was Eddie. And I was able to block every one of Eddie's jabs with my face. And this taught me that this was not what I wanted to do. I decided that I liked my nose just where it was. And the next morning, my dad was a big boxing fan. He used to take me to Madison Square Garden. I remember going there to watch Archie Moore fight, and you know, the point of interest there was, you know, just watch his jab, watch his jab. Well, Eddie taught me a lesson, you know. And anyway, I walk in, my dad's shaving, he looks at me and says, "Man, what did the other guy look like?" And I said, "Well, you look pretty good, Dad." And he said, "Maybe you ought to consider what your interests are here." The other person was Maurice Fetty. Maurice Fetty was our youth minister. He was somebody that came to our church as a result of some sort of program that had been worked out with the folks in Indianapolis. And our minister, Apolonio Melosio, who was my uncle, but who was an interesting fellow in that, and very influential in all our lives. He had a great library at the church, and he kept bringing books and books and books and books, and he would buy books, but they were all available to us. And so you had Plato, Dostoevsky, Baldwin, Jonathan Swift, Melville, you know, Hemingway, and books, you know, about anything you can. If you expressed an interest in any type of book, he would go out and buy it, and then we would share it amongst ourselves. And it was at Hermosa where I developed my love for classical music. And music was tremendously impactful in my life. And my love of music and the discipline it required kept me out of trouble during my formative years, so I could survive until adulthood. And this involved, again, drugs and gangs. It was the gang scene in New York at the time is nothing like we see today. You know, you didn't have children running around with automatic weapons and what have you. But it was still very, very scary. And you could be walking through a neighborhood, and if you didn't belong, I don't know what it was, they would sense that. And so you'd walk along and you'd see some guys on the stoop, and suddenly, you know, they're getting up and they're walking towards you. And, you know, it's fight or flight, and if you fight, you're going to get beaten up, and if you make them work to catch you, it's going to be worse. So, you know, you just stop and try to talk your way out of it. And I told Lee once, I said, I got stopped once, and they wanted money, and I didn't have any. And one of the guys said to me, he said, "Don't ever let me catch you again without money." And I thought, now, how am I going to, you know, should I carry money in my shoe just on the off chance that I run into this slug again, you know? So. Other influential men included Jack Cohen, who developed in me a love for big band music and the baritone sax. Dr. Paul Fuller, who was my advisor at Transylvania, and the men of the American Legion Band of Bronx County. This is a group of men. We were coming back from a summer program, musical program. We were carrying our instruments. There was Willie, trombone player, who went on to the Manhattan School of Music, played with several big Latin bands. Eddie Rivera, who became a jazz-based player. Look him up, jazz-based Eddie Guagua Rivera, and me. And this Cadillac pulls up, black Cadillac. I remember the window goes down, and we look in, and it's a white guy, you know. So I thought, oh, geez, you know, what's this about? You know, is this guy going to kidnap us? You know, and he starts talking to us about the American Legion Band. He says, "You guys want to play with a group?" I said, "Well, sure. We're always looking for opportunities to play." And he told us about the American Legion Band of Bronx County. He said, we're playing. We rehearse at the old Bronxboro Hall, and Wednesday nights, show up. We did, and we did that for several years. This was an incredible group of men. They were veterans from World War I, the Second World War, and the Korean War. And they were very influential in terms of just their musicality. They were funny. You could talk to them. They were always interested in what we were doing. I credit them with again, just continuing to help me grow in terms of my love of music. And it's within the American Legion Band that I started playing clarinet. And my first teacher was the first clarinetist of the American Legion Band. Other influential men included my dad. No surprise there. I think if you go around the room, most of us would say that our dads were the most influential men in our lives. It wasn't always so. Like Mark Twain, I could say, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to be around him. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years. Actually, for me, the transformation occurred when I was 16. I remember it distinctly. We were talking on the stairs in my parents' home, and I started to confide certain things to him, and it was remarkable to me that everything he said made sense. And every word he uttered was intended to impart his wisdom to me. I gained a new appreciation and respect for him, and thereafter, I knew he was on my side. He was an avid reader and a sponge of information. You know, my dad's one of those guys where, you know, if you needed help with your homework, you were reluctant to ask him because you had to set aside a half hour to get, you know, to the point. Because, you know, it's the old, you know, what time is it? You know, here's how you build the clock, you know. He only had an 8th grade education. My mother only had an 8th grade education, but they were two of the wisest people I've ever known. He didn't go on beyond the 8th grade because at that point he was commandeered to keep the books for a local store. My dad was somewhat of a show-off. I'm not sure how many of you have met my dad. My dad was about that tall. He was a little guy, energetic. He was small, but you know, he was, oh geez, you know, he wouldn't take anything from anybody, which was a strength and a weakness. But we can talk about that some other time. But he could take. We would do this just to watch him. You know, you put a column of numbers, and he could go down that column and give you the total. He would go to the store, and Lee can attest to this. He would go to the store, and we'd go through the store, and we'd buy, you know, groceries, we'd put them in, and you get to the checkout line, and he would, if he had the exact change, he would have it in his hand like this, where they were totaling up the groceries. Growing up, he was a bartender, and he was a bartender at the Roosevelt Hotel in New York, in the men's bar, the Rough Rider Room. And when I turned 18, drinking age in New York when I was growing up was 18. When I turned 18, I decided I'm going to the Rough Rider Room and I'm going to order a drink. Okay, so I show up. Two things happened that day. One was when I walked up to talk to him, he was engaged in a conversation with somebody else, and they were speaking Italian. And I thought, well, okay, I never knew that before. And I asked him about it. I said, you know, well, you speak Italian. You know, what's that about? I didn't know that. He said, there are plenty of things about me you don't know. That's number one. Number two, I ordered the drink, had the drink. He didn't bat an eye. You know, poured it for me and what have you. Thereafter, he stopped drinking. I asked him about, you know, the Italian part of it. He said, you know, when I first came in 1939, I worked as a dishwasher at an Italian restaurant. And I lived in the back of the restaurant. And the family lived upstairs. And after a while, they started to invite me upstairs to dinner. And I didn't speak Italian, they didn't speak Spanish. But between the two of us, you know, we were able to speak, I don't know if the Italian, you know, you have Spanglish. I don't know what the Italian Spanish version of that is. But he still remembered the Italian. How many of you remember Ollie Lyons? You know, Ollie was a member of this church. Great guy, great guy. He was deeply involved in stewardship and finance part of it. When Ollie's wife died, we had Ollie over for dinner. And during that conversation, Ollie mentioned that he had worked in New York, that he had worked in the advertising business in New York. And I asked, I told him about my dad. He said, oh, where did he work? I said, the Rough Rider Room in the Roosevelt Hotel. I said, really? He says, I used to go there because the Penn Station was across the street. I used to go there, on Fridays and on other occasions before I went to work. And I said, yeah. He said, your dad was a bartender. Mm-hmm. So I got a picture of my dad in his waistcoat behind the bar. And he looked at it, he goes, oh, Johnny. I said, you knew my dad? He said, oh, yeah. I mean, we used to go up there, we used to talk to him. He was like the local shrink for all of us. My dream in high school was to go on to music college and become first clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic. I met Stanley Drucker, who was the first clarinetist, in 1965, and told him that my goal was to play with the Philharmonic. And he asked me what I meant, and I explained to him that ultimately when he retired, or even before he retired, I was going to replace him. And he just kind of looked at me and said, oh yeah, good luck with that. He was good-natured about it and wished me luck. I mean, obviously I was joking with him, but not really. I gave up on that dream. Stanley Drucker was with the New York Philharmonic for 61 years and retired in 2009 as a principal clarinetist. So I'm glad that I was not all that interested in pursuing that. And through high school, I participated in the all-city scene, the all-city music scene in New York. We had rehearsal passes to the New York Philharmonic, which is how I met Mr. Drucker. We got to watch Leonard Bernstein conduct the orchestra. And I would check out, one of the things I would do is I would go to the library. See, I'm telling you I was a nerd. I would go to the library and pick up the scores of what the concert were going to be. And then I would drape the score, and then I'd either get the miniature scores, I'd get the large director's scores, and I'd drape it across my lap and sit there in the first row and just follow along. And you're all thinking, okay, Santana, what was that all about? Well, I got to tell you, it's a great way to meet girls. But aside from that, it was interesting just to follow the scores. And so my junior year in high school, I intensified my study of the clarinet, doubled down on private lessons, and began to play with small ensembles from the Manhattan School of Music. Often, and I'm going to keep cycling back to the Mozart. Ultimately, we would often we would play at the Mozart. We would rehearse there. And that's where I transitioned to the next question posed for this gathering, which is tell us about a particularly difficult period of your life and how did your faith sustain you. One of my dear friends in high school was a fellow named Phil Collette. He was a year ahead of me. He was a tremendous clarinetist. He and his mother had moved to New York from California so they could study clarinet with Leon Rushinoff. And Leon Rushinoff at the time was the clarinet instructor at both Juilliard and Manhattan School of Music. Well, he got into Manhattan, and during his first year I received a distraught call from him because he wasn't cutting the mustard. Phil had spent every summer since he was 8, at Tanglewood, and he wasn't cutting the mustard. Or he didn't feel like he was cutting the mustard, because he was still just a phenomenal musician. And I had played with these groups at Manhattan, and I realized these guys are really, 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 really good. Am I ever going to be able to be that good? And I ultimately decided, no. I had raw talent, I had lessons, I worked hard and what have you, but to get to that level was going to require more than I could deliver. And so this is my senior year in high school. I've already made my decision, I thought, in terms of school. I was going to go to Manhattan. I had turned down or allowed to lapse, several opportunities to attend school. It was 1966, Vietnam. And if you're not in school, you're going to get shipped over. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to waste a year, doing something. And I had one scholarship opportunity still left. It was Fordham that I could go probably. And so I started to wrestle with what to do. I wasn't interested in getting drafted. I wanted to go to college. And my resistance to the draft was not based on any ideological thing. I wanted the college education first because I wanted to, if I was going to be in the military, I wanted to be an officer. But I concluded that I had to do something, and I prayed about it. I mean, and listen, at 18, I wasn't that heavily involved in prayer, and it's not something that comes easy to me. I pray, but prayer where you're sweating and you're holding on to the prayer beads and you're really, that wasn't something that was in my DNA at that time. And it's still not. I shouldn't say that. It sounds like I'm qualifying it. It's still difficult for me to pray on a constant basis. I was praying on a constant basis then. And then I received a letter. Before I tell you about the letter, I want to go back to La Hermosa, okay? La Hermosa, several years earlier, had guests visit the church. It was a group of young people from Georgetown Christian Church. And a lot of you have heard this story before. They came, they showed up, as a matter of fact, at the time we were downstairs boxing, beating each other up. And the minister, Bologna Melesio, came in and said, listen, we have this group out there, would you take them around the church and show them what have you? And so we did that. We invited them to stay for the night service. They did. We explained to them that this is we're Disciples of Christ Church, but our roots are back in the Pentecostal tradition. And so this service may be a little livelier than you're used to. But they stayed, we paired up with them, they enjoyed it. We offered to take them around the city to be their personal tour guides. They accepted. And we did that, our young people's group. So we took them places that they normally would not have gone to. And the following year, they had 4 of us visit them. And during that trip, I met people in Georgetown, at Georgetown Christian Church. Well, as I'm struggling with where to go and what have you, I get a letter from one of the families in Georgetown. And the letter is inviting me to apply to Transylvania and telling me that they've sent a check to Transy to cover the application fee, and nothing ventured, nothing gained. I did that. I was accepted. They sent me a letter. They said they want to give me a scholarship. Great. I went to Transy, and for what I thought was going to be 1 year, and that was in 1966, and here I am. Transy was first integrated in 1964. At the time, there were only 4 of us of color, but I came to love Transy. During the summer of 1968, I went back to New York, where I became involved in the civil rights movement, and more specifically in the Puerto Rican version of the movement. Aside from the justice aspects, I was drawn into the movement by the opportunity to be around intelligent, passionate, articulate people who like to party. That year, and I rose in the ranks. I'm not sure how that happened, but I rose in the ranks, the leadership, and I became the spokesperson for this group. And I was sent to Washington, D.C. in 1968 to testify before a congressional committee. High point of which was I got to meet John Glenn at that time. And then we went to the Democratic Convention in Chicago. I'll not get into all the details. Suffice it to say that when I got back, I was angry. I was angry at cops, and I was angry at white people. which created a problem for me because, Transy is comprised mostly of white people. And I was offered an opportunity to transfer to NYU, and for some reason, I felt that God was telling me, you need to go back to Transy. Don't give up on that yet. You need to go back to Transy. And I did. And I talked with friends and what have you. And ultimately, I decided that the best way to help others was to finish my education, to comply with my military obligation, to go on to law school and become involved in justice issues. And aside from the vicarious pride that I take in the success of my children, my proudest accomplishment is my association with Central Music Academy. The last question posed here, and I'll finish up, I apologize for running over, involves looking back at my life and identifying one thing for which I am profoundly grateful to God. This was the toughest question for me to answer, because as I thought about it, there are so many things I can mention. My family, my children, my wife, my grandchildren, my music, my church, my life, the opportunity to serve, on and on and on. And so, here it goes. The envelope, please. The one thing I am most profoundly grateful to God is for God's clear involvement in my life. From taking me as a little boy running around naked and barefooted in Puerto Rico, to sheltering me from the destructive ravages of drug addiction, to exposing me to the beauty of music, to instilling in me a sense of justice, to allowing me to love people for who they are. One of the things I'm proudest of with this church is our welcoming statement. One of the things I'm proudest of in my involvement with our welcoming statement is the fact that I made the motion to have it adopted. And to bringing me this place and this fellowship. But mostly for my salvation and for a belief system that encourages all of us to do good. Thank you.
Just remain standing, and I'm going to have Bill Kerwood offer our benediction today.
Thank you.
Gracious God, we have come together to share good fellowship and food so sumptuously provided for us. We've come to listen to one another. We've come to share faith journeys that make us glad and strong. Strong to be your men of faith. And as we go, oh God, we know we go back into the daily living of trauma, of disasters, of great floods, disasters where we see cities mercilessly destroyed and children suffering. We have come amidst political turmoil, O God, where our hopes become fears, and our fears become lack of action. But Lord, deepen our faith as you have done in these moments together, and now send us forth with a deep secret in our hearts. We are Christians, and we give you the praise and the glory. Amen.
Amen.